All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. Just looking down, making sure my phone was off so that if it does ring, we won't hear it. And I won't hear it because it'll make me jump out of my skin. 240-283-7190. What did I say? 240-363-7190. Please do join me. Would love to talk to you today. It is the free-for-all, but kind of the same format, a little bit maybe different. We do revisit topics basically that I've touched on throughout the week on the Fridays where I do a free-for-all, and also really want to hear you chime in. It can be on something off script, something I haven't really mentioned even during the week, although I prefer to stay on topic to a degree. Got some feedback from some of you. I'm not going to really respond to it in this program unless you call in. Sometimes I do show the comments I get, whether on social media or in specific response on YouTube to a program. I had some rather pointed criticism, and I don't think it was fully fair because it was personal. It was ad hominem. It wasn't on point. It wasn't, hey, you said this, but it's wrong. That's what I think a good conversation boils down to, a good dialogue. So again, I'm not going to respond to specific commentary, specific criticism I received. I'm not going to show it today. But what I am going to say is what I respond best to, what I think, and what I believe very strongly is most important, is to take issue. If you don't agree with someone, take issue with what they said. Say, hey, you said this, and then quote them if possible. But I think that's wrong, and here's why. Personal responses, you believe this, you don't know that, you're ignorant of the other thing. I mean, where does that get you? It gets you nowhere. I saw Jimmy Dore do this with Marianne Williamson. I basically agreed with Dore when they were arguing about, I think, aid to Ukraine, because she's a big supporter of that. Maybe it was to Israel. I don't know. She supports that as well. And he said, well, do you know this or did you know that? And I mean, that's the kind of like gotcha question where, first of all, I may not agree with the facts that you assume are true in your question. It's very rhetorical. It's confrontational. It's not of the, if you say, well, Hal, you have been criticizing Israel throughout the past week for the, relentless barrage of bombs and missiles against Hamas. And I think you're wrong for these reasons. One, I don't think it's been a relentless barrage. Two, I think that to the extent they've been bombing Palestine, it's justified. Okay, fine. We can argue that. I could say to you, well, why do you believe it's justified, or why do you think it's not true? And we could talk about, say, the hospital attack, right? And we really don't know. And I would counter with, yeah, but what about the bakery? What about the fact that southern Gaza is being attacked, even though Israel said, go to southern Gaza and you'll be safe? Or that a refugee camp where a number of Christians have been holing up in hopes of avoiding being, killed from the air by the Israeli Air Force. I'll say, well, how about that? Was that okay? And then you could say, well, I think this, or, and then we can go back and forth, and it's a real conversation. But when you just say, well, you don't know what Israel's thinking, or you don't understand the history, that doesn't get us anywhere. Unless you say, well, this history is why Israel is justified in killing, 7,000, somewhere in the 7,000 number of Gazans killed so far. Virtually all of whom is, I know not on Yahoo said we've got 1,000 or so Hamas fighters. I remember Obama would say that too when we were droning weddings, and maybe we'd kill 50 people. And he'd say, well, we got a high level Al-Qaeda operative. And I mean, maybe, but does that justify creating potential terrorists over the next 20 years because they've been so traumatized and angry at, a village party being destroyed by a drone and maybe parents or children killed? Does getting one Al-Qaeda operative justify that? I mean, we can argue it. I would say absolutely not. If you want to join me, 240-363-7190. Our foreign policy is awful. And so is our domestic policy. And so let's go to Maine, the Lewiston, Maine area, at least where the story originates. This is, of course, the mass murder there. I think they're up to 20. The video I played yesterday had 16 dead. Then it was the New York Times reported 18. I understand now they've got 20 confirmed murdered. And the suspect, Robert Card, I believe, unless there's something breaking that I missed early this morning or today, is still at large. I wanted to play this video because it does seem to offer perhaps a potential way out of the periodic, relatively frequent reports we have of mass murders in the United States because of guns, because of weapons of mass destruction that we have allowed unelected judges and the NRA to determine, and politicians who are in the pocket of the gun lobbyists, the gun makers. We've allowed this to continue for a decade. Here is a story with and the witness, the interviewee, is related to a friend of mine. So that friend brought this to my attention. I think it's interesting. Let's play some of this clip here.
Joining us now is Margaret Groban, a former federal prosecutor who now teaches Second Amendment and firearm law at the University of Maine. She is also a board member of the Maine Gun Safety Coalition, a nonprofit organization that advocates for stricter gun laws. Professor Groban, thanks for being here. And I am sorry for anyone you know in Maine who has been affected by this horrible tragedy. Let me just first start with the federal gun laws. It sounds at first glance as though that law should have been in effect for this individual who was in a mental health facility and who had firearms. What happened here?
Yes, the federal law is very narrowly drawn, and it would only apply, the firearm ban would only apply if Mr. Card had been involuntarily committed to that mental hospital or that mental facility. And we still don't know whether or not he committed himself voluntarily or involuntarily. And that makes the world of difference.
That is a massive sort of distinction, isn't it? That yes. Someone who could be having psychotic or mental health episodes where he is hearing voices, but if he sort of checks himself into an inpatient care facility, can still possess a gun according to federal law.
And in fact, the law provides that if that person has to be told of the firearm consequences if they are involuntarily committed, which leads some individuals to commit themselves voluntarily, so they will not be subject to the firearm ban.
All right, so let me just stop it there for a second. And this is insanity. I mean, let me make it easy, because the federal law provides that if you, and just, she said this, so I'm just repeating it. The federal law says if you commit yourself voluntarily to a mental health institution, they can't take your gun. So my response is, my response is this: nobody gets to carry a weapon around or possess a weapon like the one that I've circled in red on the right of your screen. That's it. That's the law. The law is you don't get that weapon. There's no possible reason you should have that weapon. It's not a hunting weapon. It's a semi-automatic that's clearly designed to kill people. And so the answer is that's what the law should be. And no more discussion. You don't get to have a weapon like that. It's not good for self-defense. If someone breaks into your house, you're not going to grab something like that. It's simple, easy to determine what we should do. You don't get that weapon, period, ever. And it's obvious this was a gun expert. This guy was in the military. He was apparently a sharpshooter. He had been, gotten medals or whatever, honored for his dexterity, his facility with weapons. He knew just the right gun to get to kill the most people he could kill. The simple, easy answer to preventing many, not all, massacres, obviously, is you don't get a weapon like that. It's not a hard one. It's really, really not hard. So if we're going to be serious, we've got to figure out how to elect people, including presidents, who aren't going to put on the Supreme Court gun nuts, people who are in the pocket of the gun lobby. But we have to go further than that. We also have to make sure we don't elect representatives who are going to vote against sane gun laws that would simply say, no, you don't get to have that weapon. That is not something that anyone in our society ever needs to have. So that's the very, very simple answer. Now, I know some of you are going to say, but Hal, you don't even say vote for Democrats. And at least Democrats are better on guns. I agree. They're better on guns. But if you want poor, struggling, and working people to vote for candidates who will take away their guns, then what you have to do is support candidates who are for true economic justice. If you care about sane gun laws, and Bernie wasn't great on guns, that was one of his weaker issues, but it would be a heck of a lot easier. First of all, he would have appointed Supreme Court justices who would support sane gun laws. But it would also be much, much easier to get working class Americans to vote for politicians who support sane gun laws and will pass them through Congress if they also supported Medicare for all, if they also supported an end to the military adventures overseas. Then we would get a much better, safer country where people didn't have to worry that if they go to the bowling alley at night, they're going to get shot. Unfortunately, that is not the America we live in. All right, I want to get to the next video segment with Margaret Groban. And again, this is a friend's sister-in-law. So he brought this to my attention, and I do want to go through the laws. Okay, so that is the wrong video. So let's continue, with more Groban. Here we go. And I think we're going to have to jump forward a little bit on that. Got this working. Give me one sec, folks. Apologize for the slight confusion. All right, here we go.
Who could be having psychotic or mental health episodes where he is hearing voices, but if he sort of checks himself into an inpatient care facility, can still possess a gun according to federal law.
And in fact, the law provides that if that person has to be told of the firearm consequences if they are involuntarily committed, which leads some individuals to commit themselves voluntarily, so they will not be subject to the firearm ban.
Can we talk about the sort of second layer of protection here, which is the yellow flag law that Maine has in place? I know that you've called that yellow flag law pathetic. Could you elaborate on that and why you don't think it's effective?
Yes, I feel like certainly it's better than nothing, but I think it creates obstacles that really allow it to be used effectively in our state, because it requires 3 different determinations that someone is a danger to themselves or others. First, you have to go through the police, and you have to call the police to come to your house and find that this person is a danger to themselves or others. Mm-hmm. A lot of people with family members in crisis are not comfortable, for obvious reasons, involving the police. Either they're worried about the response, or they're worried their loved one's going to be arrested. So there is, and our Fatality Review Board found that there's enormous danger to police in responding to these incidents as well, and they feel trauma from responding to these incidents. So first, the police have to respond. If they find they're a danger, then they take the individual into protective custody, which sounds an awful lot like an arrest.
Yeah.
Then,
all right, let me just stop it there. So you've got the image of the shooter there, the bottom right. Basically, what Margaret Groban is saying there is under Maine law, it's virtually impossible to take those guns out of the hands of these people. And what she was saying is you have to go to the police. If you're in Maine, you can't just go to court. Now, I think all of these laws are the hoops are way too high and too hard and too small and too tough to jump through. But even in Maine, it's worse. Now, Maine is one of the safest states. There's much less gun violence in Maine. There's a number of reasons for that, but but we always have to look at things relatively. With smart, sane gun laws, there'd be fewer deaths in Maine, without question. I mean, we're not talking about Alabama. This is a much safer state. But even so, we have, and you'll hear Groban talk about it, high suicide rates, and it's just too hard to take guns away from dangerous people. Only police, not family members, can raise concerns, and she'll explain how in red flag law states, it's easier. It's easier to take the guns away from people who are a danger to themselves or others. Here we go.
They have to be seen by a mental health professional who makes the determination whether or not that person, a second person, makes a determination that that person is a danger to themselves or others. That has to be in writing. And then it goes to a judge to make the determination that that person is a danger to themselves or others. So it creates these layers that really are not necessary and makes it much more difficult for this law to be effective. Now, it has been used. I think it's been used around 80 times, which is a good thing.
Yes.
But it could be even better, especially in a state where gun suicide is one of our biggest gun problems.
Well, and you see how close this family got to checking even the many boxes that exist in terms of the yellow flag law, right? They alert law enforcement and military officials something's not right we are worried about Robert Card's behavior, and yet it just wasn't enough to get the weapon seized.
Right. And so with red flag laws, that family with a loved one in distress can go straight to the court and file an affidavit under penalty of perjury. If people are concerned about people misusing the process, they do it under penalty of perjury, saying my loved one is in crisis. I'm worried they're going to harm themselves or others. Please take their gun away. And guns are...
All right, so that's better, of course. But let's say that the court, and remember what Groban said, was that police, you go to a police officer and then the police has to go do their own investigation, and they check the person out, and that's a danger time, right? You go to the house where this very likely dangerous person who has a weapon, whose family is trying to get that weapon out of their hands, and you go to their house, and that's a time when the police are at risk. But even if you go to the red flag states, which Groban says are better, and I agree with her, you still go to court, so you still have to jump through hoops. And if the court determines that the individual is indeed a danger to themselves or others due to mental illness, then the court in a red flag state can direct the marshals, the marshals at the court, or the police. They'll issue an order to have the weapon seized and have the individual brought into custody. That's a danger time. Whenever you take somebody who has a weapon, like the one on your screen now that's circled in red, whenever that individual is being taken into custody, that's a danger time. So the solution is nobody has guns like that. That's the easy answer. Now, can you always keep every gun out of the hands of crazies? You can ban them. You can say only if you're on a military base, only weapons that are the Army or whatever, the various forces of the U.S. military possess are allowed to be accessed, and only by people in the military. Now you can certainly, and hunting weapons, sure. If you need a handgun to protect yourself based on your dangerous profession, you're a pawnbroker, you're a bartender, I understand. those are exceptions that maybe we should recognize. We can discuss those. We can debate those. We can have a conversation about those. Weapons like the one circled in red on your screen, nobody should have those. And then you don't have to worry about putting law enforcement as well as everybody else at risk when you try to take this guy's, prized possession, his gun away from him. It really isn't hard. All right, you're listening, you're watching Halitics. I'm still in my old radio days. You're listening. No, you're watching. You're watching Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. Please click like. Please click subscribe. Got another subscriber yesterday. Was happy about that. It's slow. It's a slog. Okay, I'm not getting the jumps that I was hoping for. We're moving forward, but I need you to click subscribe. All right, let's get back to Groban. I think she's doing a great job, though, explaining the laws here on the Alex Wagner show there on MSNBC.
I mean, judges are very used to dealing with these issues. They make determinations about safety and danger every day of the week when they set bail, when they sentence people. So this is not an uncomfortable situation for a judge to be in. And I think Maine would be really well served if we improved our yellow flag law. The other issue is we have very limited mental health professionals in the state. Yeah. So we're using these mental health professionals for an assessment, but not for treatment.
Well, clearly something needs to change. And the big question is, will it? We will see. Professor Margaret Groban, thank you for your time and expertise. It's great to have you here in New York today.
Thank you.
All right. So I thought that was a good interview. I thought it was instructive. So I appreciated that I was directed to it by my friend. I won't identify him by name. He probably wouldn't mind if I did, but I try not to out anybody as a viewer, listener, whatever, or even friend without their permission. And again, last shot right there, that gunman, the killer, and I circled specifically the weapon because it does seem so clear to me. The answer is you just don't let anyone have a weapon like that. It just doesn't. I mean, is that a hard one for you? Call in 240-363-7190. Is that a tough one? I'm sure it isn't. Again, there are challenges because of all the money in politics, the gun makers buying off politicians, and also the fact that we don't have a unified Democratic Party, partly because of that very reason. Gun makers are buying off Democratic politicians. Well, I think Bernie was clearly impacted by the support of the gun lobby. That said, and fear that they wouldn't support him, and of course he lives in a gun owner state. He represents a gun owner state. So that's part of the issue. But again, we could get past that if we had a Democratic Party that was unified in support of the poor, struggling, and working people's interests, because many of them, they would vote for Democrats, even if they were concerned some of them might take away some of their weapons. All right, 240-363-7190. We don't. We live in a corrupt kleptocracy. We do not have democratic rule. What do we do? So I really wanted to call this show, today's program, Resistance. How do we resist? How do we respond to an unjust government, to one that doesn't represent us, that consistently acts against our best interests? What do we do? What should we do in these circumstances? Well, I always platform, whenever possible, the resistance to ecocide, to the fossil fuel state, the petro state in which we live. And again, if some of you think that's a little melodramatic, I would note we are the number one producer of oil and gas in the world. We're the number one, I believe, exporter of oil and gas in the world. Maybe not exporter, but certainly producer. And when it comes to liquefied natural gas, I believe we're also number one. So nothing for us to ever be proud of, although our former Democratic president, Barack Obama, certainly did brag about that. Here are some heroes of our time taking action to stop new pipelines being laid in the District of Columbia.
Gas leak! Methane kills.
Gas leaks.
Methane kills.
Gas leaks.
Methane kills.
Gas leaks.
Methane kills.
Gas leaks.
Methane kills. Stop Project Pipes. 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 We don't want to
Taste that way.
We understand the choices that you're making. We understand that you did not come here to participate in the death project. You came here to do the work that you need to do to take care of your family.
Wherever you want to
I'm going to stop it there. We'll have some more clips, but basically you see those 4 folks and 5 were ultimately arrested. We'll show you a little bit of from the arrest as well. But you see the 4 folks there who sort of armed, linked arms through those pseudo pipes to stop the streets being dug up in D.C. and to replace the pipes. And I think this is a very effective protest. I feel like we have an obligation, we have a duty to try to, prevent more evil where possible. And I want to believe, I was talking to my son about this, if I was a young man in 1940, 1939, would I go to Europe? Would I go to England or London, England, and join the RAF to fight the Nazis? I don't know. I mean, I'd like to believe I would, but I don't think so. I don't know. And, my son said, well, I would do it, but I don't know if he would. He says it, but who knows? He is doing something really good. He does teach kids with emotional and mental challenges. And I mean, that's a wonderful thing, a wonderful way to make your garden a little, to cultivate your garden in your neighborhood. So I'm proud of him for doing that. But would he or I go join the RAF? I don't know. I can't say I would. Would I have gone south during the civil rights era and taken on the Bull Connors and the Ku Klux Klan and the murderers, the white supremacist murderers in the South in the late 50s and 60s? I'd like to believe I would have. Some people did. I don't know that I would have had the guts to do that. So I want to believe when there's evil, when it's obvious there's evil, I would step out against it. But I don't want to be arrested like these folks. There's clearly evil. What they're doing is the right thing, to link arms and say, we're not going to let you dig up the streets of D.C. and put in pipes that are going to last another 40 years. But would I do that? I don't know. I mean, I do know I haven't done it. I'm not risking arrest. And another evil, right? Fighting against the Israeli Defense Forces bombardment of Gaza. I mean, I could make the argument, and I think it's a good one, that what Israel is doing to Gaza now is kind of like the blitz that the Nazis launched against the Brits back in the 40s. I'm not going into Gaza and defending, trying to save Gazan lives. I wouldn't have to join the Hamas and fight Israel. You could go in there and just make speeches and get camera crews and try to broadcast and display the pain and suffering of the Gazan people at the hands of, innocent Gazan civilians, the children, the death and carnage at the hands of Israel. But I'm not doing that. I'm sitting in my house talking to you. So it's easy to say we have to be constantly standing against evil, but it's very hard, isn't it, in the moment to do so. And that's why I want to platform whoever does, because I think what they're doing is so important and so critical, and certainly critical to our future. So let's get back to these folks who are the heroes of our time, without question. These are the civil rights activists of our time. These are the pro-peace, the White Rose Society of our time.
Now, for those of you saying, oh, there are better ways to do this, we have tried emailing them, we have tried peaceful protests, we have tried going directly to city council. We went to the Wilson building like in April or May.
Wilson building
No, it was
is
June. It was June 9th.
D.C. local government headquarters. And so this activist is recounting from Extinction Rebellion, by the way, DC, all they did to try to stop the 40-year pipes from being laid. And they're going to explain, I think, but I want to make it real clear, yes, there are leaking pipes, methane gas pipes in DC, and they should be repaired. But this is an enormous project to completely replace all the pipes, all the gas pipes in DC. It's the wrong way to go. We've got to be moving away from fossil fuels, not laying the groundwork for another 40 years of fossil fuel consumption in the District of Columbia. It's absolutely wrong. And this is supposed to be a very progressive area where they take seriously the climate catastrophe, the new Holocaust.
That's right. We really did not want to resort to this, but City Council is sitting on their ass this whole time. The public has spoken. We're demanding a renewable future. The city has supposedly decided to move towards a renewable future, but we're not seeing that yet. We haven't been seeing that, and as people have already said, this project would lock us into decades more that we cannot afford. We cannot afford any more time.
Yeah, and that's the bottom line. And you see these activists, a lot of times, not all of them are young, you can see in that picture, but some of them aren't. It's hard to get often young people too involved. But the climate catastrophe, the new Holocaust, is one area where younger people certainly recognize that it's their future that's on the line. Old gray beards like myself, we've kind of already burned up the planet, and we don't have that much more time left in any event. So it is good to see the young people out on the streets. This, by the way, was yesterday in the district. All right, let's get back. I do, again, want to give these folks as much time as I can on my program, even if it's through video. I'd also like to talk to you, 240-363-7190. And I'll also, if you do comment in the chat, I've got it up. I'm looking at it the whole time. So if there's any chat, I'll try to respond. But let's get back to our DC-based Extinction Rebellion heroes.
$30,000 every single person in DC is going to have to pay for this project. And why this project? In 40 years, when this project is done, we can't be burning this methane. We can't be burning this methane for another 10 years. We need to electrify. So that's why we're here. We have wind, we have solar, we have storage devices. That's what we need to power the grid. We have the technology. It's lower cost. I mean, even without polluting local communities, wind, solar, and storage are now drastically lower than methane gas.
I'm going to stop it there. You hear the background with the public address system there with the bullhorn, I guess. But what this activist is saying very clearly in language, maybe not it's as clear because there's double audio there, but what he's saying clearly is that every DC resident is going to have to pay $27,000 to complete this pipeline replacement program. It's crazy expensive. It locks the city into a more expensive pattern of energy usage for 40 years with respect to natural gas versus clean green electricity. And of course, most electricity today, I don't believe, is clean green, but we're getting there. Most of it is coal, natural gas, maybe some oil burning plants, rather than hydroelectric, rather than solar, wind, geothermal, and the like. But we can generate pretty darn clean, it's not perfect, but pretty darn clean electricity. So that's what we should be doing. And the way we do it, and I know what he said that it's cheaper, but it's cheaper in some ways, but when you have a hungry power plant on I-95 in the Meadowlands or anywhere in Richmond, California, when you have it already there, it's the sunk cost, and you've got a utility that's profiting from using it, they're going to keep using it. They're not going to invest in solar and wind technology and geothermal, or they'll do both because those power plants are very profitable. So what's the response? You got to take the profit out. How do you do it? Make the input that much more expensive. You say, all right, you want to burn natural gas? You want to extract from the ground? Fine. But every single BTU, every single gallon, every single ton of coal, you're going to be paying a hell of a lot in tax to the government. Every sale is going to be taxed at a very high level, which is going to mean people are going to be looking for any alternative. If you have a power plant and you've suddenly got to pay 3 or 4 times what you were paying for every ton of coal you buy, I think you're going to start thinking about other sources of energy. Same with liquefied natural gas. If we said to Europe, yeah, we're not going to ship you that LNG anymore unless you pay, 5, 10 times what you're paying now in taxes, guess what? They'll start. They'll quickly transition. They'll transition real fast. And that's the only way we save the planet. Let me see if I can get a little more. We've got a couple more videos here I want to play for you. So same folks. We'll move through this, and then I'm going to end. I got 2 more, right? I got Israel and I got Ukraine. Maybe we won't get to Israel today. Israel-Palestine, I've been talking a lot about it. Haven't really touched on Ukraine, although it is the free-for-all, which means I should be really focused on the stories we've touched on all week. I'm giving you platforming the climate activists, however. Let's go.
The D.C. Public Service Commission was formerly chaired by Willie Phillips. He's now the chair of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and they're happily approving LNG export facilities all throughout the Gulf South and the rest of the country. They're killing the planet, FERC is, and so Willie Phillips has started out his killing when he was back here in the D.C. Public Commission, and when this D.C. Pipes project was approved.
All right, so I'm going to, so there, I was going to say I'm going to stop, but that was where I had ended that video. So again, what that activist, same one we'd heard before, he's talking about liquefied natural gas. I mentioned that. We've talked about this on the program, how we vastly increased our production and throughput of LNG since the Ukraine war started. So this is all under the Democratic President Biden. And it's interesting because I had this conversation with a progressive, somebody who's a true true progressive Democrat, and I pointed out that the Democrats in Congress should not be trusted. That for example, they are in lockstep support of Hakeem Jeffries, who is the Congress member from Wall Street and from AIPAC. So they're completely supporting the bombardment, the killing, the massacre of the razing of Gaza. And the response I heard was, well, he's better than the Republican they just put in place. Is it Mike Johnson, I believe? And I said, well, how is he better? I mean, he's part and parcel of the problem. And then the response was, well, the Democrats, and I hear this from Arlen a lot too, and well, the Democrats are trying to make things better. Maybe it's incremental, maybe it's too slow, but at least they're making things a little better. No, that's the problem. They're not. If you could make the argument, well, Democrats aren't great, but things get a little better, incrementally better when they're in power, that would be one thing. But that's not the case. Things are getting worse and worse. Just related to how we are now greatly increasing the amount of liquid natural gas refineries and production capability under Biden. So he's worsening, he's exacerbating the climate crisis. Biden has been funding to the tune of billions of dollars this devastating war in Ukraine, and now is doing the same to support the massacre of Gaza. So explain to me again how Democrats are making things better, even incrementally, because I ain't seeing it. They're both against you. They're both on the side of the war makers, the weapons manufacturers, the oil and gas and coal industry, both of them. We have to come up with another option or we're doomed. And right now, I mean, maybe not me. I'm going to be all right. I got maybe 30, 35 years left if I, live to be mid-90s, which I hope I will. I feel like I'm a healthy guy. I'm 60 years old. I could go for another 35, I believe. But I'll avoid the deluge. But is this what we want for our kids and grandkids? Is that really what we want? All right, let's go. I have not been focused on Ukraine because Israel-Palestine's taken all the oxygen out of the room, but I thought this was a really interesting conversation on France 24 yesterday. By the way, the activists we saw in those video, the video from DC, streets of DC again yesterday, and that's Extinction Rebellion. So this is yesterday, war in Ukraine. You can see, by the way, that chart, virtually no change in the lines in well over a year. The red remains red. The Ukrainian forces have taken back virtually no territory. And to the extent they may have taken back a few kilometers here or there, the Russians have regained them in other areas. All right, let's go to France 24.
For more on this, we can cross to London, Domitilia.
All right, so I'm going to let's get to Domitilia right here.
Now, fourth time Prime Minister of Slovakia. You heard our Europe editor, Armin Georgian, referring to what Robert Fico said earlier in the day in Bratislava. Let's listen.
I have a problem with sanctions. I guess that doesn't surprise you. At the same time, I assure you that I will support all initiatives of the European Union for peace negotiations and security guarantees. My government's position will be that an immediate ceasefire is the best solution we have for Ukraine today.
Now, Slovakia.
All right, so, it seems obvious that Fico is right. I believe he's sort of a right-wing populist, or that's how he's characterized in the media. But Slovakia is saying, hey, we're not going to be helping NATO fight Russia anymore. Slovakia can't afford it. It's not working. It's not effective. We're not getting anywhere with this policy. So we're not going to help. So the alliance is fracturing right now. This is right now. And we also have Hungary making the exact same calculus. Again, this is not, France or Germany, but these are important EU countries. Slovakia bordering on Ukraine. There's Hungary's Orban. He is another right-wing populist. EU's strategy on Ukraine has failed. They are not going to support more war against Russia. It's just that simple. They're not going to do it. And we also have Poland making a similar decision last month, which I told you about. I think basically that decision was driven by trade considerations, and they're having some, disputes with Ukraine. They don't want to provide support for a competitor. So the lockdown, the tight EU solidarity, the NATO support for Ukraine is obviously fracturing. We've seen very, very large protests in Germany against it. Let's hear what the expert here has to say about it, and we'll focus more again on what the U.S. is doing as well. But this is not going, and you'll hear this war in Ukraine is not going the way American neocons like Robert Kagan, like Victoria Nuland, who has some very new high-powered position in the Biden administration, as does Elliot Abrams, the architect of Iran-Contra, now part of the Biden administration. Here is France 24.
Yeah, in the last hour, we've had another one of those announcements you're referring to. This one coming out of Washington, $150 million. Assistance for Kyiv that includes additional munitions for national advanced surface-to-air missile systems and anti-aircraft missiles. We get these announcements regularly, Domitila Sagramoso, but on the ground, we're not seeing the big breakthrough that everyone had hoped on the Ukrainian side since the spring.
Yes, I think there was a lot of expectations that the Ukrainians would do really well very quickly, and that became also problematic because it raised sort of the stakes. And what happened was that there was sort of regular taking of the temperature of what was happening on the front line to determine whether Ukraine was going to succeed or not. What is clear is that the Russians set up very effective defensive lines from the areas around the Dnipro on the west all the way to the Donbass through Zaporizhia and in the areas of Kherson. And that is making it very difficult for the Ukrainians to advance because, because of the minefields, because of the whole system of protection and tunnels and artillery, that the barrages that come over when there are advances, and also because the battlefield has now become a lot more transparent through drones and through many other sort of more modern technologies. It's now much easier to hit at moving targets. So any kind of offensive faces a lot of challenges. And this also applies to the Russians. All
right, so I'll stop it there. So she's just saying that when and this has always been the case in warfare, the defense has a big advantage holding on to ground rather than the offense. We almost always see more casualties. And she's saying that is continuing. That is the situation right now. We've got John on the line. I'll get to you in a minute, John. But one of the points that was made by the host of that program is that we hear these announcements. U.S. announces more military aid. And you can see from this chart, this is updated September 21st. Let me get that on the screen for you, and we'll go to a couple of others as well. But so as of the 21st, and you can see humanitarian aid, this is only through July 31 of this year, we've spent about $30 billion of the total of $77 billion. This is through July 31st on this war. And then you can see $46.6 billion in military supplies, military support. And it's led nowhere. It hasn't gotten the Ukrainian forces any closer to Crimea. It hasn't gotten the line moved back towards Russia. It has led to massive destruction, death, carnage. We, again, need to get out of Ukraine. The situation has not changed. I'm certain, a differing opinion. Let's go to John. John, I got a little bit of time for you, but then I got to move on. Hey, good day, John.
Okay. How are you? Good morning. I'm going to keep calling until other people do, and that's not a threat.
No, I take it as a promise. I'm going to hold you to it. I appreciate it. I greatly appreciate your calling, John. Thank you.
Hey, Hal, I wanted to start with the examples that you gave for why you were talking about Hakeem Jeffries, and once again, you're talking about there being very little difference between the Democratic and Republican parties. And the examples that you give, what were they? You had discussed no difference on climate, on the climate issue.
Endless
and
war.
What was the other example?
Endless
war. That's right. Now, these are two things that the average American, I'm not going to say they don't care about, but everybody right now has been treading water for so long. They just, they need like a life
and also
preserver.
In the economy, John.
I'm talking about the economy.
Yeah, and the Democrats aren't any better on the economy either.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that's correct. I know that they got a lot of deferments on their student loan payments. Everybody who owed money on student loans, some of them got their loans restructured so that they didn't have to pay, those runaway interest rates, the snowballing interest. I know that Biden dealt with that. And I know that, when Republicans get in power, they start cutting money to Medicaid, and they do everything they can to punish black people for being black. And that's not like a Democratic thing. There are real consequences. You just don't feel them, in your walk of life.
Why do you think, John, more black people are moving towards the Republican Party? If the party is, as you say, and many others say, is overtly racist, and
right.
Then why are we seeing higher percentage of African Americans, especially African American men, saying they're going to vote Republican?
Well, I think that is overstated. One, I don't think it's a significant number, and two, I think that what that reflects is the amount of money that they dump into their propaganda machine. They're on social media. They've got their own television network. When they looted the treasury during the Iraq and Afghanistan war, conservatives compiled massive amounts of money to do stuff like this. Before that war, the cost benefit of them running this type of propaganda campaign, I don't think would have been feasible for them. But after the war, they made a lot of people extremely rich, and they've now got the money. Their donors have the money to dump into the propaganda machine, and that's how I explain that. And I think it's a very small
wouldn't
percentage.
It be fair to call, but aren't MSNBC and CNN basically arms of the Democratic Party, just as the Fox and One American News and stuff? They often take positions. I find their positions most of the time revolting, but they do seem to defer with the Republicans on occasion. I don't think you ever hear Rachel Maddow go after Democrats. Maybe some hard right ones on occasion.
Maddow is not. Yeah, but MSNBC is not Maddow. And I think Maddow, as popular as she is or was, I think that she gets a lot of editorial review over her content, probably more so than the other.
Again, I'm going to let you go in a second, but I just throw out one other point in terms of, and I think both parties pursue policies that harm poor, struggling, working people. I agree with you that the Democrats certainly pay much more lip service to, ideas like anti-racism and white privilege, but I don't believe that those theories, or whatever you want to call them, have led to better qualities of life for black people. I think they've generally harmed black people by distracting all of us from really important issues like, for example, trade, Medicare for all, and the like. But if indeed it's the Republicans who are worse on balance on race, then again, how do you square that with, say, Bill Clinton? During his administration, both the federal government and state governments locked up more black people than any other president in American history, and it was a direct result of policies that he championed.
Yeah, it was a direct result of his crime bill. Yeah, absolutely. But the nation was also experiencing a crime epidemic at the time. But I don't know how. I don't know. I would just say today that they wouldn't have got any different a deal from the Republican Party on that one aspect. In fact, I believe it was Republicans that pressured him into doing that. They had an awful lot of leverage over Clinton after they bankrupted him, from the whole Whitewater thing that morphed into the sex scandal. They bankrupted the Clintons. And then as soon as they did that, Wall Street approached them and said, hey, we got a little plan of how you can bounce back from this after you get out of office. So, all
right, John, let me just last point.
If we're going to talk about this stuff, Hal, let's tell the whole story. Let's tell the whole story.
We do need to tell the whole story, but now is not the time because it's 12:59. I'm not even going to respond. It's not fair to you. Let's talk next week. And I really, really appreciate your call. I'm going to hold you to your promise to keep calling. John, sorry about that. I do feel bad. I said this yesterday. I hate letting folks go. But in this case, the program is starting to wind down. And I don't want to belabor it too much longer. But let me just see if I can get just a little more from our about Ukraine and the situation. Yeah, so we're spending all that money, $46 billion. We're getting nowhere. It's gone nowhere. This is why, this war is very unpopular. It could cost Biden re-election. Just let me get the last part in here, and then we'll go quickly to Israel, because I have one other point which I think is on point with this.
Hands. What could we see a situation where the Russians gain ground in the east and lose Crimea? Is that possible?
I mean, it is a possibility, but it's very difficult right now to imagine that the Ukrainians, without a proper amphibious force, would be able to take over Crimea.
All right, so just want to finish that. The last sort of desperate hope that the interviewer was thinking maybe she'll get to as well. We're losing, or the Ukrainians are not gaining any ground, and we'll show the map right here, not gaining any ground when it comes to the Eastern Front. But maybe things will get better, and I'll see if I can even show you with my cursor. That's sort of the goal here. But so you can see this blow-up map, and I didn't put all of Crimea in there. But maybe there's a possibility that the Ukrainians will be able to take the Crimea, which is in the south. And she's saying absolutely not. They don't have an amphibious force. See, it's a peninsula. It's almost completely surrounded by water. That's not going to happen. So, I mean, it's just not working. Let's face it, this is not working. And, we should stop it. We should simply stop the waste. And in fact, it's not only that we're not doing good, we're actually making things worse. We're making things worse in Ukraine for the people of Ukraine. We're prolonging the agony, and we're not doing what Fico said we should be doing, and he's right, promoting a ceasefire. These really are not hard. Again, this is not hard stuff. Just like it's not hard that you ban those weapons of mass destruction. It's not hard to say, let's stop pouring billions of dollars that our people need to a country where they're only doing more harm. So I wanted to end, and I'm going to go a little long. I don't like to do that, but I will. I wanted to end with kind of a distinction between Ukraine and Israel. I think you can make a better argument that we should be providing support to Ukraine than you can. We should be providing support. I don't support military aid to either country, but or aid at all when it comes to Israel. I do think humanitarian aid, if we can make sure it's going to get to Ukrainians, makes sense. But I think you could make an argument that it passes, the giggle test, right? You don't just giggle when you hear it. Some people would. Probably Jimmy Dore would. I wouldn't. You can make a pretty good argument, I think, that Ukraine, because it was invaded by Russia, because it's a sovereign nation with its own government, its own military, there is strategic interest that we keep Russia from taking control of Ukraine, and therefore we should provide military support. Now, I think we should try to keep Russia from taking control of Ukraine, but I don't think we should do it by military support. I think there's plenty of other options. I don't think it's either A or B. Either we give Putin what he wants, or we just keep pouring billions of dollars into endless proxy war with Russia. Those to me are not the options that we should be looking at. But okay, I get it. And I think we also, of course, kind of, kept waving a red flag in front of Putin until he fell for it and invaded Ukraine. So I don't think, we should do it. But I get the argument for providing aid, military aid. I don't get the argument for providing aid right now. I don't think there's any good argument, reasonable, any rational argument, except that rich, powerful people want us to do. And that's why we're doing it. That's why we're supplying Israel aid. If anything, we should be, if we really care about countries being invaded, we should be supplying Gaza with military support, right? I mean, they're the country that's being invaded, being bombed mercilessly. So here's Glenn Greenwald on this with Sabby Sabs.
I had him on my show as well. And when Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz would express their opposition to the war in Ukraine, they would say things like, well, Ukraine is not the 51st American state. We can't afford to go and defend Ukraine and help Ukraine better their country when we have so many problems in our own country. In order to improve, Marjorie Taylor Greene would talk about how women can't even get baby formula. We have this opioid crisis, all of which is true. But then I would say to them, well, doesn't that apply to Israel as well? Israel is also not the 51st American state. And suddenly everything would shift. And of course, right now, I don't think you have a single Republican in Congress, not one, standing up and saying, I'm opposed to U.S. aid to Israel. I think only Rand Paul is doing that, and that's based on his principle about foreign aid, but every other one is doing that. And the reason is obvious, which is that the political pressure in the United States to punish politicians who don't support Israel is higher than it is for any other issue. John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt wrote the definitive book about that back in 2006 called The Israel Lobby. It's because there are a lot of American Jews who are very politically active.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. I'm going to go back, though, because I want to finish his discussion. But this is extremely important. What Greenwald, and I'm going to just repeat it, basically, even politicians who are taking the right position with respect to Ukraine, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, will not say, no, we shouldn't fund the Israeli war machine. And Greenwald, when he asked them, he says, hey, I don't get it. I think you're right. You are right on Ukraine. But those arguments are even more powerful when used. The arguments against providing military support to Ukraine are even more powerful when it comes to Israel. So why aren't you going to say, no, we will not fund the Israeli war machine, the Israeli killing machine? We're not going to give Israel more money to kill Palestinians. The argument for that is even stronger than your very principled and correct argument against supplying aid, military materiel to Ukraine. And what is their response? They hem and they haw. They got nothing. And why? In fact, what's the real reason? Because you cannot stand against Israel. There's just too much pressure by, special interests. Wealthy Jewish Americans who align themselves 100% with Israel. AIPAC, weapons manufacturers, they will punish any politician who takes even a slightly rational stance against supporting Israel. And here's more on from Greenwald.
With an affinity for Israel, there are a lot of evangelical Christians who have the same affinity for Israel.
All right, and then let me just finish this off. So that was interesting, but let me get to the second part of that conversation, which is really fascinating when he gives you an example of a politician, a very powerful politician, one you might not have thought of. I didn't, who did try to stand up to the pro-Israel
Israel at all
AIPAC
is so
lobby.
enormous that almost no politician would be willing to do it. Just the last point is the last politician that tried was Bush 41 back in the late 80s, because George Bush was surrounded by these realist sort of foreign policy advisors along the line of Mearsheimer, people like Jim Baker and Brent Scowcroft. And they were saying, why are we giving all this money to Israel when they keep pursuing policies that harm our national interests and our national security, like expanding settlements? And they told the Israelis, if you don't stop expanding settlements in the West Bank, we're going to hold up our loan guarantees. We're not going to keep giving you money to do things that harm our country. And the political backlash was so enormous. James Baker was widely branded an anti-Semite that no politician was willing to do it again. Once Clinton got into office, when he defeated Bush 41, he and Hillary were so pro-Israel that all of that pressure ended and it never came back.
It's so fascinating, isn't it? So according to Greenwald, and I have no reason to think he's wrong, I'm sure he's right, the last American president who would say boo to Israel was H.W. Bush. And he himself suffered a very significant backlash for doing that. I do remember some stories where James Baker was called an anti-Semite because he went to Israel and said, stop with the settlement. I do remember that. And I thought, when that happened, I thought Baker's really doing a great thing. I was really pleased. I like Jim Baker. He was a realist. He was doing the right thing. And W was punished for that politically. Did that keep him from winning the White House a second time? Maybe. Didn't help. And Bill Clinton learned his lesson, learned that lesson strong. Oh yeah, fine to go after black people. We can lock them up in, the millions, but we sure can't back away from the Israeli war machine. Or I'll risk, re-election. I'll risk becoming a, 100 millionaire after I leave office. That's our country. That's our government. Have a great weekend. And I will be back on Monday. We've got Arlen scheduled. Hey, enjoy yourself. Try to have a little fun. That's my, I hear from people, how can you be happy? I try to compartmentalize.